up, everybody? Welcome back to the Film Jump with Jesse and Chris. Today we're going to be talking about Monarch Legacy of Monsters, give you our review of Season 1. So far the only season, but let's get right into it. What's up, Chris?
Not a whole lot. We're going to have a bit more of a comprehensive as a whole season discussion. We're not really doing an episode-by-episode breakdown. It was said that they designed it as one long movie, so we're going to kind of review it as one long movie.
I love the Monsterverse so far. A huge fan of every single entry, some more than others. So that's kind of where I'm coming from as a fan. And if you've heard anything we've talked about before, we're both very, very big Godzilla fans. So I would say we're even biased towards it.
Yeah.
So if anybody should love the series, it should be us.
Yeah, we're the market for this. It's made for us. I agree. I think they're 4 for 4. I like all of the films for different reasons.
Tell us a little bit about the show. A quick synopsis, what it's about.
Sure. So essentially, if you're gonna lay out the 4 movies of the Monsterverse chronologically, you would kind of start with Kong Skull Island, which takes place in the 70s more or less, then the 2014 Godzilla film, which takes place in 2014, and then there's a 5-year gap before you get to Godzilla King of the Monsters, another 5-year gap, and then Godzilla vs. Kong takes place in 2024. This show is situated in 2015, 1 year after Godzilla 2014. So it's kind of after Kong Skull Island, after the first Godzilla movie. This is sort of a bridge from the more kind of grounded universe that we start with. It sort of transitions us into the more outlandish style of the newer films. And I think it's a slot that it slides into very, very well.
Yeah, and it is in the 2015 and flashes back to the 50s. But
yeah, it has flashbacks to the 70s and the 50s, and you also see a little bit of what they refer to as G-Day of the San Francisco events of Godzilla 2014. So it kind of jumps all over the timeline, but really kind of does this great job of filling in all these gaps, and what the show does best, in my opinion, is filling out the timeline, lore building, world building, just gluing all of the films together in a really cool way.
Yeah, so the show kind of starts off between characters and 2015. They're doing their thing, and then it flashes back to characters back in the 1950s and how they're connected to the organization of Monarch, which is like the secret organization that kind of like finds, investigates, maybe more or less protects, it even seems like, or
deals with, manages the titans, the monsters of this universe.
It's like the Area 51 of the monster universe.
Yeah, sort of. What S.H.I.E.L.D. was to the MCU early on, Monarch kind of is to the Monsterverse. But I think just execute a little bit more smoothly and effectively. But so that's the gist of what the show is. The character drama kind of stems from this father who is presumed dead, and the daughter is trying to, has done the things where, you find sets of keys and things of that belong to him, and you're trying to find out where they go and where they lead to. And so she goes to Japan, and she finds an apartment, and she uses the keys to unlock the door, and she finds a whole secondary family in there, another wife and a son that he had on the side, separate from the wife and daughter that he had in America. And so that's the genesis point of sort of the character arc of the series.
Yeah, he's going to be the half brother. So I guess more or less the main character it becomes an ensemble, but the main characters for the modern 2015 is going to be Kate Randa, her half brother Kentaro Randa, a friend May. And then you have what's really cool, probably the coolest little thing about this whole show is the fact that it has Kurt Russell and his son Wyatt Russell starring as the same character in 2 different time periods. Which they found very interesting, and partly why they took the role. So Kurt Russell plays an older version of Leland Shaw, and his son plays the younger version of Leland Shaw in the 1950s.
Yeah, and Lee Shaw, in my opinion, steals the show. And in terms of, not in terms of the actors, because the actors are split in the timelines, but if you're talking about the character that is the constant across both timelines, in a lot of ways Lee Shaw is sort of the centerpiece of the story, because he's sort of a big part of the modern story and the 50s story, and is the biggest sort of consistent aspect of it. So, they definitely sort of get you in the door with the appeal of Kurt Russell and Wyatt Russell playing the same character, and then seemed like they were kind of using that to then try and get you on board with all these other characters.
Yeah,
kind of to a mixed result.
yeah, yeah. And I remember in the beginning of the show, it also has
John Goodman
John Goodman. Yes.
makes a quick cameo as his character
Yep.
from Skull Island.
Yep. He sends off a letter or a message in the ocean off of Skull Island, and it ends up getting picked up by Kate Randa and Kentaro Randa's father. Which then we don't really know what he did with that message until later on. But anyway, so again, like you said, that's like the genesis of it.
Yeah, and Bill Rando, John Goodman's character in Skull Island, is the grandfather of these two main character children. They're Kate Randa and Kentaro Randa, so sort of weaves it all together, with this family.
Yeah, so the show starts off, and I think a pretty decent first episode. It introduces the 1950s characters, and I'm going to immediately jump into my opinion that they are definitely the more interesting bunch, stronger scenes for sure. Every time we're in the 1950s, I'm having a great time. I believe these characters. They have a little bit more believable, dramatic weight to their dialogue, and the characters in the modern, the 2015 era, they feel somewhat YA in their drama.
Yeah,
like
young adult,
adult,
as if they're like a Hunger Games divergent kind of writing style.
And that's not so much a dig in and of itself, because you can have very interesting stories with young actors, young characters. Millie Bobby Brown was in Godzilla, King of the Monsters, and Godzilla vs. Kong, and she's great.
Yeah, and Stranger Things is great, and it's based around kids. Some great movies can be based around young characters and their perspectives. It's a lot of great real estate for a narrative. But.
Yeah, I just think that some of these characters maybe could have been combined into one. If I'm being realistic, if I'm being honest, rather, like Kate and her brother Kentaro, I feel like really they were both created just to add more secrecy to their father character, who works for Monarch, and we're shown that he's gone or dead in a little bit, but then we learn later on that he's not dead, and it's just like, it's a little weird to me. I don't.
Yeah,
and you kind of told me like maybe Legacy of the Monsters isn't necessarily just about the Titans or the monsters.
Yeah, these people are kind of all monsters. Like even like like the father with two families. Yeah, he seems to. It seems to not. It's not. It doesn't indicate that he loved either family less than the other. But it's like that's a pretty messed up thing to do, to have dual families that you keep secret from each other. And we see with the 50s flashbacks, some of these characters are kind of they're not bad characters or anything, but there's dubious things happening all throughout. So this Legacy of Monsters is kind of referring to humanity and human beings as monsters, as well as the Titans as monsters, and and like the modern characters are kind of they're not exactly pictures of morality either when some of the things they get up to. So it's like they're kind of I don't know if you'd say monsters, but they're not exactly great people either in some situations.
Yeah, and to touch on the writing, like some of these things are introduced and they're not even brought up again. For example, we see one of the main characters, Kate Randa, on G-Day or right prior to G-Day, she is shown to be having an affair with somebody.
Yeah, she's juggling two chicks.
She's cheating.
She's juggling two women.
Yep, she's cheating on
her significant other.
Yeah, and it's like they don't really touch on anything like that. It never comes back. I don't know if they're saving that for season 2, but it's like...
I seem to get the implication that maybe both of them died during G-Day. Maybe both of her sort of lovers died during G-Day, because she certainly seems to be single in the current 2015. So, but it's like, it doesn't really delve into it enough, but like you see that, it's like, oh, so she was kind of this, cheating person, and she's mad at her dad over something similar to what she did. And they don't really delve into that much. Like, she doesn't have the moment where she has this introspective about like, I hate my father because I'm like him kind of a thing. Like, it's just, I don't know, that never struck me.
Surface level. I mean, and here's the thing, I was never expecting a show about what happened in between the Monsterverse movies to be some dramatic masterpiece of a show like a Game of Thrones or Breaking Bad, but I was expecting like, I don't know.
I was here for the world building, the Monarch behind the scenes stuff, the connective tissue. That's why I agree. When you go back to the 50s and it's sort of the origins of Monarch, that's the really good stuff.
Cool.
They're making offhand references to Los Alamos, so it's like entrenching it in history and doing this fictional kind of divergence from history. The Castle Bravo test being repurposed as an attempt to kill Godzilla. Things like that are very cool. Period piece kind of monster stuff is cool. Those characters are well written. And, that stuff is so compelling, and the modern stuff feels so. I kept calling the modern characters the Scooby Gang. Like, it just feels so sort of like there wasn't as much legitimacy or thought put into it. And someone said, I can't tell if these characters are being written. I can't tell if they're being written as if they're 16 or 26. Like the actors and actresses playing them are all like in their late 20s or early 30s, and it seems like they're playing for the 20s. Like, none of them are like in high school or anything, but some of the writing and the dialogue, it feels like they're doing like it's like teenage angst that they're sorting out, and teenage banter that they're having, and it just feels very kind of odd. And you talked about maybe combining characters and things like that. For me, like, they kind of have this three-way split with the sort of Scooby Gang, where you have Kate and Kentaro as the siblings that are trying to uncover the mystery of their dad, and then May as this kind of third wheel kind of character that ends up having links to Apex, which is an organization established within the Monsterverse. And so that's kind of her sort of crux into the main line of the story. But to me, I feel that she was an unnecessary character, and that it would have been much more interesting to have either Kate or Kentaro be tied to Apex. And because it's, instead of, it could have been completely two siblings with Kurt Russell trying to sort of find and uncover the mystery of their dad, and that would have been a 3-man team,
right,
in and of itself. That would have been interesting enough. But then they have this May character, and it feels like they then had to kind of conjure up things to make her sort of relevant and entrenched in this plot, when she doesn't have as much skin in the game as the two siblings do.
Yeah. And what's interesting to me is the fact that, yes, it's a show for television, so naturally you're going to have many characters, just because of the amount of time you spend with them. But the problem is, the show is presented like a movie stretched out over 10 episodes. So
it's not 10 mini movies.
It's right. And when you have like, if there's too many characters, too many like main characters, I mean, to make it feel like a proper ensemble for a movie.
Yeah, we've got a 50s plot line with primary characters and supporting characters, and we've got a modern plot line with primary characters and supporting characters. And so it's already kind of two shows in one. And then you definitely don't want to have extraneous characters in either timeline. And more of the characters I would have liked to see, like, I would have sacrificed one of the 3 Scooby Gang characters being there, so that we could have gotten more of the characters, the supporting Monarch characters in the modern era, the characters like Tim and a character by the name of Duval. Like, they are, the Duval character is the sister of Bryan Cranston's wife from Godzilla 2014. So
Sandra, yeah.
Yeah, Sandra. So they have these Monarch characters. They're interesting, and they're just kind of compelling and engaging, because they're sort of part of the inner workings of Monarch, which is kind of what, the show is called Monarch. So I kind of wanted it to be more focused on people that were entrenched within Monarch, and less, two sibling outsiders is kind of all you really need, and they didn't know their dad was involved in Monarch. Like, you just didn't need a third additional character woven into all of that, because it's, it probably sounds good on paper and you're building to scale for a TV show, but it really was an extraneous kind of character.
Well, and it's also one of the sins I think is committed, as far as like how the audience knows all about Monarch already from the movies that we've already seen. Mm-hmm. So the characters in the modern day, and they don't know what Monarch is, and they're trying to figure out. We as an audience already know what Monarch is, so that mystery for them trying to figure it out doesn't feel natural.
Yeah,
I would rather have it focused on just the origins of
and the operations
their operations of.
Yeah, because if you're trying to, the show doesn't do it for a terribly long amount of time, but if you're trying to play the game of like, oh well, how dangerous and seedy is Monarch? It's like, well, we've seen in the films that they're not bad guys, and they're pretty straightforward and more heroic. So it's like, you're not really going to play up this like, oh, Monarch secretly like this awful, terrible organization of dubious things. It's like, you could have some of that in there, but like, we know that generally speaking, Monarch's like, the good guys.
Right.
So kind of playing them as this like dark and mysterious, and they might, our main characters might be in danger because they've crossed paths with Monarch. It's like, the Monarch's not, gonna like take them out back and shoot these guys or anything like that,
At least the Monarch that we know in the movies.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe in the 50s they could have showed some of that going on with the origins of Monarch, some darker things, but so it's like, you never want to kind of be assuming that the audience knows less than they do. Like, sure, maybe there are plenty of people that watch this show that have not seen all of the Monsterverse movies. I mean, that's to me, I don't think that's the target audience of people that haven't watched the Godzilla movies, but you're going to watch this show that's tied into them. Like, I don't know if there's a terrible amount of people that are doing that, and so most people have seen the films and they kind of know what Monarch's all about. So why play this kind of narrative game of like, is Monarch good, bad? I suppose if you're watching it all chronologically, it has a little bit then, but I don't know. I don't know if that's the best angle to do.
Yeah, another issue I had with some of the character work, and then we'll move on to like the structure of the show, and then
some of the things,
and then what we liked. But another problem that I had is that in the 1950s and in the modern time, you have these love triangles that kind of happen, but they're not really love triangles in the sense that the characters in the 50s, there is a love triangle, but there's never any conflict between the three of them.
Yeah.
There's really only the conflict from
sort of a defanged love triangle.
Yeah, it's the character of Lee Shaw loves the character of Keiko.
Yep.
And they kind of go through like their relationship and why he can't do it because of his job, protecting this and that.
And they almost have the fling, but then it gets interrupted.
But it kind of gets interrupted, and then Randa moves into it, and kind of
it never becomes.
Was there a single point in there where she's like, you know what? No, I love. It was kind of like a weird.
Yeah, it just kind of went from one to the other with like the least dramatic kind of transition as possible, and it's like
no conflict.
You can argue that it might be kind of cliche and textbook to have like the. Oh, you betrayed me. Were we going to be a thing? Like that would have also been very YA. It's like they kind of handle it more like adults, but it's just kind of a weird thing. It's like, well, why go through those motions? Like, couldn't she have just been from the outset friends with one of them and romantically involved in the other? Did it have to be this weird kind of chess game? So.
Yeah, I would have liked to have seen him just maybe start off as friends with Bill Randa.
Yeah,
and that's his anchor in that relationship, and have the love story be between Bill and Keiko solely.
Yeah, because as it's designed, he starts off as sort of her escort, if you will, military escort, and then they get introduced to Bill as kind of like this wild man, and it almost maybe would have been played it more interesting as an inversion of that. Like it starts off as kind of like a buddy's guy, and then they get introduced to the female scientist as well, and then naturally the more scientifically inclined folks end up sort of being more interested and compatible with each other. Like it just could have, and that maybe could have been an interesting thing to play out, because there's kind of like a weird love triangle, not so much like there's love drama in the modern setting as well.
But there's hardly any drama.
Yeah, exactly. It's
like the character of Kentaro.
It's cooking just to cook, and it's not really cooking.
Yeah, he the character of Kentaro, he likes May.
They were a thing. They've hooked
right?
up,
and he
before.
Still is not over her as. Yeah. We are shown 100 times. Like the dude just doesn't get over. It's actually quite exhausting.
Yeah.
And then, for whatever reason, Kate kind of begins to very
There's a lot of hand holding at every opportunity between Kate and May. They never say anything over. They never have the direct conversation, but it's like they're teasing this like, oh, well, Kate's kind of got this thing for May now too, and it's like, okay, but like then that also kind of doesn't really go anywhere. It's like a lot of non-committal stuff, and it's like, is this just like, oh, we've got to plant all these seeds to keep people talking and keep people guessing and keep the discussions going? It's like, okay, I guess, but I don't know. That's not the kind of character drama that I'm terribly excited to see.
Yeah. So, my opinion, totally like the 50s character stuff, even though they had its own issues. That would have been a much more compelling show.
For me, the entire first season could have been that, and that would have been like a heck of a first season.
Yeah,
like the full period piece. That could have been really awesome.
So I kind of want to move on to the kind of structure of the show itself. Yeah. And then we'll get into like kind of things that we did like.
Absolutely, because there are some highlights for sure.
Yeah, So the structure of the show, as I said, is 10 episodes. Should have been 8.
Yeah, and look, I'll give them, I watched a pretty long interview with some of the creative team of the show, and they said that Apple kind of really only ever talked 10 episodes. That's kind of what Apple wanted. Apple's footing the bill for this, so I can understand that their hands might have been tied there, but, taking that out, I'm not here negotiating with Apple. I'm just talking about what feels like it would have been better for the show, and I think this budget or a similar budget spread over 8 episodes, this narrative real estate spread over 8 episodes probably would have made the show a little bit stronger, streamlined it a little bit, because there's some fat here,
Yeah, and you were telling me how each 2 episodes is directed by the same person.
Yeah,
and
each,
they're kind of like
each set of 2 episodes was almost treated like a movie of itself.
and that's true. You watch some of it, and here's one of my bigger complaints is that I do understand the narrative structure of a show and that cadence that they have to have.
Yeah.
If you go back and watch a show like Lost, it is you can't
There's
really,
a formula.
You can't really watch that show without commercials because it is so edited for that build up to then stop at the cliffhanger, then you pick back up on.
Yeah.
So
it's like watching an anime episode, and even on a Blu-ray, they still have like the eye catch halfway through for the commercial break. Like it's designed into.
So there's a couple episodes, and specifically one where they introduce a very, very cool snow titan, the Frostvark.
Yeah.
And they're dreading this, and there's a little bit of an action beat at the end of the episode, and then it kind of just stops.
Yeah, like does the cliffhanger thing.
But it doesn't really feel like a natural cliffhanger.
Yeah.
And then the next episode, it picks up right where it left off.
And they finish off that
and
sequence.
They finish off, and it feels like they edited a longer sequence and just split it right in the middle rather than editing it for a cliffhanger and then the beginning of another episode. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely seems like they were trying to sort of... Because clearly they didn't have a ton of money to do a ton of monster material in this on screen in this show. And we'll get to that more in detail, but it feels like they were really kind of strapped in terms of how did they make that decision. Do you say, okay, the end of this episode, we're going to cut it before the monster arrives so that we can have the whole monster sequence at the start of the next episode and start the next episode with a bang? Or do we have a big climax for this episode where we do the whole monster sequence at the end of this episode, but then, the next episode's kind of just the aftermath and it's a little light? I suppose if you were binging the show, it might not hurt as much, and on Blu-ray, ultimately people will binge it, but for the episode by episode, it kind of feels like you get not enough to satisfy you at the end of one episode, and then not enough to satisfy you at the beginning of the next episode.
This is only a one watch for us because we watched it as it dropped. Maybe a rewatch and more of a binge approach could lessen that, awkward.
Lessen some of these blows. But
let's talk about, for me, what I think is a positive and somewhat of a negative, and that's the monsters and the monster screen time, or the Titans, rather.
Yeah.
So when I watch it, I totally understand that there's a budget, and I know that these things are very expensive to put on scene. They're not working with giant movie sets like a big production would. They're much more, condensed, smaller. Totally get it. But you're taking on a cinematic universe that exists, and it's very big. Titans are big.
Yeah.
I kind of felt like there just should have been like 3 minutes more, 2 minutes more in the grand scheme of things.
Just a little bit,
And I know that the show isn't called Godzilla Legacy of Monsters.
Of course.
So,
but Godzilla was in every trailer and on every poster. It's like, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't say, oh, come watch our show, Godzilla's in it, and then be like, but don't complain about there not being very much Godzilla, because it's not about Godzilla. Like,
the drama.
Like, look, I'm all for, yes, the human characters are priority. This is always going to be more dramatic than one of the big blockbuster movies. No one was expecting 5 minutes of Godzilla in every episode.
Right.
We got 5 minutes of Godzilla in the whole season, though. And, I'm not sure if, maybe the best answer is somewhere in between those extremes. That's all I'm kind of advocating for. This is born out of a monster movie franchise, just like you go to an action movie for the action. You don't go to an action movie and be like, well, were you paying attention to all the characters? This is a drama, you fool. It's like, well, monster movies, the hook that sets them apart from all the other movies is the monsters. You can't complain that people want to see a healthy amount of monsters and they want it to be kind of prominent or get enough of a dosage of it, or a show that's kind of born out of this franchise, that people are hungry for as much as they can get, sure, within reason, but it's never a wrong thing to be like, well, I would have liked a little bit more Godzilla in this show that features Godzilla and is built off of Godzilla's popularity,
Yeah, and it's weird because his presence is definitely felt in the first episode.
Every second is amazing. Every second of screen time they use of him is fantastic too.
Yeah. I think it would have benefited from 8 episodes. You cut down 2 episodes, and then your budget maybe allots for a little bit more CGI, VFX sequences.
And you're also kind of, and maybe even you're condensing those down across fewer episodes, so maybe you're kind of maximizing what you have, instead of 5 minutes across 10 episodes, you're getting maybe 6 minutes across 8 episodes. It's like that. It pays a compounding dividend as you're doing more with across less, and it just would have, another 10 seconds here, another 5 seconds there, just to build those moments out just across the season would have really added up. And for the other monsters too, not just Godzilla.
Yeah, and there are other monsters, so it kind of fills in the gap. But You know, a lot of people complain about Godzilla screen time in Godzilla 2014, and it's only like 10, 11 minutes out of the entire 2 hour
movie.
But if you look at this, it's less than 5 minutes in the span of what, 9, 10 hours, almost 10 hours of screen time.
Yeah,
so
if you knock off that each episode's less than an hour, then you can say 9 hours
like
across 10 episodes. Yeah, exactly. So it's like, you know, and you're told that apparently it's taboo to say that you wanted a little more Godzilla. Like, people are very up in arms about that. It's like, look, it's like no one's throwing nothing but criticism at this show. There's good and there's bad, and it's like, look, you can't fault a Godzilla fan for saying like, hey, a little bit more would have been nice, and there's ways that they could have maximized and got a little bit more, you know? So it's a valid criticism.
Let's move on to the positives, because there are quite a bit.
Yeah.
I like. There's a lot I like about this show.
Absolutely.
As much as I ragged on like the YA, the young adult feeling or whatever, none of the acting felt like
TV level.
It didn't feel TV level. It didn't feel bad. If anybody I would give a criticism to, I kind of felt like some of the line delivery, if you want to get objective, from like Kentaro was a little off.
And maybe some of that maybe comes from some somewhat awkwardly written dialogue in some moments, but there's also some that it really shines. And it didn't feel like, you know, the jump that you feel like if you were watching like an Iron Man 3 and then that fall you then watched the first season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., it didn't feel like that kind of drop off of like, now we're watching this TV show. It's like, this feels consistent with the cinematic quality of the Monsterverse and the production value, the cinematography. It never feels cheap. It never feels like it's chintzy. It never feels like this is the small TV spin-off thing. Like, it feels like a very natural and cohesive extension of the films, and that is the highlight of the series. It feels like the world of the movies expanded out over 10 episodes, and that's a great thing about it.
Yes, the world building for sure is where this show excels. And like when Kate goes to Japan, you can see some of the missile defense systems that are like positioned
on like crosswalks and bridges and things
and I'm
like that.
That's something that not even the movies have shown us, to where a natural progression of a world where Titans exist would probably have
these ground levels,
like a deterrence.
Yeah,
you know?
and there are people in the wake of G-Day that are doubting that it was even real. You
know, that was one of the best bits in the beginning. When
the character in another country in Japan who's like, it was all faked. It was all CGI.
Like VFX.
You know?
Yeah, CGI.
It was all special effects.
That was good.
And it's like, it's like you would have some people that if you weren't anywhere near it and all you saw was the footage, you know, what do they call them? Crisis actors and all this other stuff. And, you know, you would have those doubts. So that was interesting to see.
The VFX on point. Now, they stretch it out, but when Godzilla is on scene, it's very well done.
Every shot's a money shot.
Impressively done.
Every shot's a money shot.
Yeah, very, very well done. The VFX work, everything, like the production of it, very well done. There's nothing really negative to say about that. Another positive for me, Kurt Russell and Wyatt Russell.
He's the highlight of the show. They're the highlight of the show.
Kurt Russell, because he's such a legendary actor, he has such a legacy. He has such weight to the show, like a gravitas, and his son is actually a very fine actor too, I believe.
Yeah.
And they add that gravitas to the show that none of the newer, younger actors really bring to it.
They're really the core hook of it. You know, they're kind of what brings everyone to the table, and everything's kind of. I wish the show structurally was maybe a bit more overtly centered with him as the centerpiece, and then it's just here's the ensemble around him in the 50s, here's the ensemble around him in 2015, and doing more of that overt compare and contrast centered around him, not making him a member of the team in both. Like, if they just leaned into making him the core of the show more overtly, I think it would have excelled. But they had young protagonists they had to prop up, I suppose.
I love all, like we said earlier, the gap filling, the introduction of Apex, and how the character of May is actually working for them. It feels like it starts off as like a small tech, not a small, but like a tech company before it grows into what would eventually build Mechagodzilla.
Yeah, and it is doing. The world building is good in a way because it's doing the sort of natural world building, which is like, more Monarch, the after effects of G-Day, you know, all these natural things. But then it's also doing the things sort of, I kind of call it like putting band-aids on wounds, you know. People complained a little bit of kind of Apex coming out of nowhere in GVK and things of that nature. And this series is sort of gets to retroactively plant seeds and show where it comes from and kind of make it apart. Like, now it's this sort of Apex versus Monarch kind of dynamic, which wasn't in GVK. But now, if you're going to go back and watch the films and this series chronologically, it feels like a natural thing set up long in advance. And so it all feels more cohesive, which is very good, you know.
And I know you can't always have your cake and eat it too, but the last 2 episodes of the show are great.
Yeah.
They're very, Very good, especially the final episode. It's like
Final episode's a banger.
they clearly saved everything, not just the budget
Yeah.
and everything for the final showdown between Godzilla and another monster, but also the emotional weight, the acting from the character of Keiko. I don't really want to spoil too much. We've kind of gotten into spoilers, but
the heaviest dramatic moments and the heaviest spectacle moments are saved for the final episode.
Yeah.
And it's all executed very well.
Yeah, they show Godzilla so well. Like,
yeah,
the Godzilla in the final episode is like the Godzilla I want to see more of. It's almost like
yeah.
more Godzilla 2014 and Godzilla King of the Monsters, but like how I think he should be filmed and choreographed.
Yeah, he ain't messing around.
The animation was amazing. There's a point where the other Titan like sprays some type of thing on his face and you see him try to wipe it off, and it was very good.
And when you rewatch that footage, you can just tell like that pissed Godzilla off.
Yeah.
And then he drops a combo on the other creature. Like, he's like, all right, like, I'm done messing around. It's just so good, putting character into the choreography of the monsters.
Oh, what I talked about earlier, how the audience knows more than the characters, and that's never a good thing. That last episode, though, or maybe it's the one before, where the character of Kentaro, he believes his friends have suffered a certain fate, but we know otherwise, and we're sitting there watching them alive, but he continues to mourn them and be sad and cry. It's like, yes, that is a real thing, but you need to show us all that and then show us that the characters are alive, so we don't think like this is for nothing.
Yeah, because you never want to be that the characters on screen are mourning characters that the viewers know are not dead, because it just feels empty, boring. Or you're just kind of waiting for them to get over it and find out. It's sort of a reverse Hitchcock technique, or the wrong application of the Hitchcock technique. Hitchcock loved to do things where the audience would see something and know something before the characters did, like a bomb under a table or something like that, so that the audience would feel dread. The audience knows that there's a bomb under the table that's going to go off, and it's just a matter of which character is going to be at that table when it goes off, and that's a tension building thing. Letting the audience know that a character isn't dead, and while the characters think a character is dead, that's like a positive thing, and you're pre-letting the air out of the balloon a little bit. You're letting the tension out. There's no tension for the viewer. When it's a dangerous thing or a stakes thing that the audience knows about, it's all tension because the characters aren't aware. They're being casual, and the audience is like, "Oh my God, you fool! What are you doing?"
It's like it's like knowing the winner of a football game, but then having to be with the audience
during the whole game,
and watching their anticipation,
or re-watching the game. When you know what happens and you're just kind of watching it go through the motions.
I don't really like that. And there's some weird things here and there that they choose to do structurally, like what they choose to do with the character of Keiko in the beginning of the show, and then you think something happens to her, but then we're with her the entire time before that. It's like a little...
Yeah, they play around a bit where they're kind of,
the chronology is a little off.
Yeah, they kind of... They clearly wanted to set up with like a bit of a stinger to end the first episode, and they sort of make you think a certain fate has befallen a certain character, and then they flash back, so now you're going to see the build-up of this thing, and it's called, like, the trope is like developing a doomed character. Like, you kind of know where this character's headed, and now you're going to see all of the lead up to where they headed that way, but you're kind of not invested because you're not going to get yourself attached to a character whose fate you know. And the whole show runs a risk of that because there's this whole modern timeline setting going on with it. So you're already, like, if you know Kong Skull Island, you know what happens to Bill Randa anyway. So you're already kind of like at arm's length from these characters because you feel like you know where they're going. And then they put some twists in there, but I think it just would have been, I almost would have liked to see what a version of this show would have looked like if all of the 50s material happened and then all of the modern material happened. Like maybe a full-blown chronological edit of it, or just keep the 50s stuff presented chronologically and not do this sort of jumping around.
Yeah, they do a flash forward in the first episode with the 50s characters.
Yeah, so they start with 1959 and then they roll it back to 1954, and it's like, oh, let's just, I don't think it had the desired effect.
One thing I did really like, and I'm sure this is setting up to be into Godzilla Kong, The New Empire, is this whole in-between of above Earth, or like where we're at, and then Hollow Earth. They have like this in-between where there's some time displacement things going on,
Yeah, and I famously loathe time travel, but sort of time distortion and time
stuff.
That sort of thing, like an interstellar type of approach, that's very compelling. I don't like characters going back and forth in time and just breaking the space-time continuum, and the idea of a multiverse and an alternate history, alternate reality stuff. Like, I can't stand those tropes generally. I can have fun with them as much as anyone else, but I don't like them in terms of narrative. But they don't do that here. They do this sort of, a time being a relative thing. So the whole idea is that if you've got the hollow earth sort of at the core of the earth, and it's this big world in the center of the earth, that the mantle, I suppose, of the earth has these pockets that are sort of...
I don't know if it's there physically, but it feels like it might be.
Yeah, this sort of intermediary space where there's sort of portals that you have to enter into to get to these special pockets.
And really only the Titans can go through because of their size and their weight and the gravity. And we won't get into it further. But
a lot of fiction science stuff. But science fiction.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. And the one thing, it's like, they introduce Kurt Russell's character, and everybody in the show is like,
you look great for 90.
You look great for 90. And it's one of those things where, okay, I know there's going to be something that's going to explain it. Yeah. It doesn't feel like a cool, like, whatever. And when they get to it, it's like, yep, well, you kind of called it from the beginning, but whatever. It's a really cool vision.
It was cool and nice. It was nice that they addressed it.
And visually, it's very cool.
Like, very well handled.
Godzilla's entrance in that final episode is so cool.
It's iconic.
And I bet we'll see it again in Godzilla Kong.
Yeah, and the same thing for these sort of intermediary pockets, which they've labeled as Axis Mundi, which is sort of this sort of between the world above and the world below kind of a concept. And so I wouldn't be shocked if we maybe see things of that nature. And it helps it's a good thing because it doesn't spoil the big reveal of Hollow Earth from Godzilla vs. Kong, because I think that was like an exceptional cinematic reveal. It doesn't spoil that, but it sort of goes in that direction and kind of, over the course of this first season, you go from sort of a grounded reality where monsters are the most outrageous thing to... which is essentially like a sort of low sci-fi where it's like, this is the real world, there's just monsters. And by the end of it, you're now in this sort of, I call it like sci-fantasy, like science fantasy, where it's like, it's a little bit more high-end sci-fi where there's pockets inside the earth and there's portals and these titans can pass through them, and there's some time distortion and
it's like
and
a
it's
fantasy
sort of,
Jules Verne.
And Jules Verne is what I always like, what I mentioned with the Hollow stuff. It feels like modern Jules Verne, and I like that kind of like it's its own genre of itself, and this season kind of transitions you from that. After this, even if this is a one and done season, you go to King of the Monsters and Godzilla vs. Kong after this, and it feels like the world has shifted and made that kind of stylistic transition. And I really like that. If nothing else, I really like that about the show.
Also, the final episode has a cool little reveal at the very end.
Yeah,
but
special little cameo.
Yeah, so definitely watch that. But it also has me kind of not worried, but hesitant to, as primarily a Godzilla fan rather than another certain Titan.
Yeah, are they gonna do season 2 where they fix all of the problems of season 1, including monster screen time, and Godzilla is not gonna reap the benefits of all of those improvements and adjustments?
Because of another certain American Titan.
That would sting a lot as a Godzilla fan. So I hope that that this isn't like, oh well, you got Godzilla in the first season, you're not getting him in the second season. So that would sting a lot as a fan.
Yeah, I agree. So overall, if I had to give it a score, I would give it like a 6.75 out of 10.
Yeah.
Generously, I bet you if I rewatch it, it'll probably go up to a 7.
6.5 feels low, and 7 feels a little
6.75.
So 6.75 is like, that's not a bad appraisal.
You might be saying, well, Jesse, Chris, come on, you guys are giving a lower rating for like a show within the Monsterverse when clearly Godzilla vs. Kong is also a 7 out of 10. But here's the thing.
No, Godzilla vs. Kong a 10 out of 10.
We base things off experiences, right? Like not so much an objective rating system, but Godzilla vs. Kong, King of the Monsters, they know what they're trying to do. They're trying to be an action Godzilla adventure movie.
And it's a matter of, do the qualities outweigh the negatives? Do the positives outweigh the negatives? And do they do so to an extent where it's sort of... like these negatives don't really matter as much, because when the movie's firing on all cylinders, it's firing on all cylinders. It's a kind of holistic kind of, what was the feel of it? Not a objective mathematical categorizing of every single attribute of the show. And was it a 10 out of 10 dialogue with 10 out of 10 characters and a 9 out of 10 plot and 4 out of 10 VFX or anything like that? It's like, no, it's like, what's your vibe? What was your overall enjoyment? What's your vibe? How did it feel? What criticisms do you have? How much do you feel that held it back? What qualities did it have? And how much did that elevate it? And it's kind of taking the average.
To give some perspective, Chris and I probably differ on favorite entries, but my favorite Monsterverse movie is Godzilla 2014, and I love the way the Titans are presented in that, the scaling that Gareth Edwards and everybody does in that movie. That's my favorite one. However, I barely rewatched that one. I rewatched Godzilla versus Kong and King of the Monsters way more. Why? Because they're so much more fun.
Yeah,
You have such a good time watching them. It's just
and I would say
it
on
is
any
what it is,
and
you
I
know?
would say on any given Sunday, either one of those is the one I pick. There's a lot of story and character things, like ensemble things that I like about King of the Monsters, and I mean the aesthetics. There's a lot of aesthetics I prefer about King of the Monsters, but just like as a viewing experience, as a watch, I can turn on Godzilla versus Kong any day of the week and just like click it in the middle or kick it from the beginning, or if I'm using it to show off a TV or a projector or whatever, like Godzilla versus Kong is just like the demo movie, and so it's just an overall 10 out of 10 kind of experience for me.
Yeah, well, I think that'll pretty much sum it up. I don't think I have any more thoughts on the matter.
Yeah, here's the thing.
I've seen some people give it like a 10 out of 10. I don't think it's a 10 out of 10 show. There's no way.
Yeah, I mean, and I could say over time a 7 or 7.5. My opinion will probably only soften on it because the flaws I can live with, and I'll get over those because the good things are good and the good things will be there. And but the flaws are there. They are present. They are nitpicks. But over time, those kind of things matter a little bit less. Would you say if you had to decide, would you take a second season or would you cut it as a one and done?
I mean, as a biased Godzilla fan, if they show him even less than his 4 minutes and 40 seconds or whatever to screen time, I'll be disappointed.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things where a second season could elevate it.
Yeah.
But a second season could also maybe they double down on all of the worst things about this. You don't have someone like Kurt Russell maybe holding it together, or they double down on the Scooby Gang and you have no cool 1950s flashbacks, and like it's all of the worst things about this first season just times 2. And then it's like, well, dang. Then it's like, well, if the second season's so awful, like maybe as a whole you don't take the show, or maybe you just say like, hey, hard cut after the first season, accept that you have some character stuff that's not really wrapped up, but just move on with the world to King of the Monsters and GVK, because that is the nice thing. If they don't make more of the show, we know where this universe goes. This isn't the end of, like, we know where the franchise and the world as a whole goes. So, and I'm not dying to get more of the Scooby Gang, so
I'm just surprised we didn't get more at least obvious precursors to Godzilla Kong, which is why I'm thinking this whole middle ground area where they show is probably going to be really the only. Maybe they might plug in a character, a side character. I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyways.
Oh, man, if they pop in, like, if we get Kurt Russell somehow as
no way.
even
There's
in a
no
cameo in GXK, I know they won't do it. I'm not hinging hopes on it at all. But, dude, that even if it's just like a cool 30-second cameo or a 2-minute cameo or something, or a dialogue reference, it would be so cool. I'd be so happy.
Yeah. If they, air quote, fix the problems, I'm game for season 2 because there's time between King of the Monsters and, GXK. And I'm all for it.
Yeah, how many people have said that Kurt Russell and Wyatt Russell stole the show and they were the best thing about it? And if you potentially don't have them in the second season, then what are you losing?
And
if you're losing your center,
be like that too,
Yeah.
Even
But I mean, here they can, if they want to completely like have my optimism and excitement for the second season go through the roof, if they say, look, there's going to be fewer episodes and there's going to be more Godzilla screen time in those fewer episodes, I'm like, those are the 2 biggest check boxes that I would ask for in a second season, and I would be all aboard.
Yeah, you just wish that they could get the budget that Disney throws the Marvel shows, $200 million, and then they could give us probably what I think everybody wanted.
Yeah,
but
I mean, because I'm all in favor of like, hey, like, because your budget is your number, and then it's about how many episodes you spread it across. So I'm like, dude, cut it to 8 episodes, cut it to 6 really big cinematic episodes, and because you'd have 6 banger weeks of ratings, people would tune into that kind of spectacle and stuff, like something to maximize your real estate here, and just make the most out of the budget you have. Maybe you don't have as crazy of an ensemble cast. Maybe lean it out a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much going to cover it. It's pretty much a mixed bag. Some really cool highs, some not so good lows.
Yeah, a net positive for sure. If you're a Monsterverse fan, I definitely say check it out. If you like, genre TV and things like that with like monsters and effects and sort of history and alternate history and world building and things of that nature, it's definitely worth checking out.
And I'm going to watch it again. So what does that tell you? I'm going to watch it again.
Like I said, if they drop a Blu-ray of this, I will buy it and I will include it in my Monsterverse marathons.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, if you have seen Monarch Legacy of Monsters, let us know in the comments below what you think about it. Follow us at The Film Jump on X, formerly known as Twitter. On TikTok, you can listen to this and our other podcasts on Spotify and on YouTube. So
give us the like, the subscribe, the comments below, share us around, share the link around.
Help us out.
Just spread the word. If you're having fun with it, just show it to your film junkie friends.
Yeah. All right. We appreciate it, and thanks for listening.